I stood in the kitchen, my hand pressed against the throbbing bruise on my arm as my son's words echoed in my ears. "Don't make a scene," he had hissed, his fist still hanging in the air. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't afraid of his anger anymore, so I walked out of that kitchen, took my life back, and made a scene at the bank. And when the dust settled, he lost everything. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The casserole was still steaming on the table when Dorothy heard the voice that always managed to scrape the inside of her chest. "Hey, Ma, can you come in here for a second?" Michael didn't wait for a response. He was already halfway back into the kitchen by the time she pushed her chair back, her knees stiff from the long drive. She passed by Sandra in the hallway, who was lighting the dining candles, all dressed up like they were about to have guests from the mayor's office. Sandra didn't look at her, just tightened her lips and adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. Dorothy stepped into the kitchen, the doors swinging quietly shut behind her. Michael stood by the sink, arms crossed, phone face down on the counter like it had just given him bad news. "I just need the card for a week, that's all," he said. Dorothy blinked. "Michael, what for?" He let out a short laugh. "Jesus, Ma. Why do you always need a breakdown of everything I ask you?" She didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the paper towel roll beside him, unraveling, one sheet dripping water from the base of a can. Soaked through. She reached out to fix it, more from habit than thought. Michael slapped the towel roll off the counter. It hit the floor with a wet thwop. "Don't deflect," he snapped. "You've got money." "I'm just asking for some breathing room." "You're not asking," she said quietly, looking back up at him. "You're demanding." And I said no. The silence that followed had weight, heavy, sharp, and thick. "You're unbelievable," he hissed, stepping closer. "All the shit I do for this family, and you can't even—" She raised a hand, palm out. "Michael, I'm not giving you the card." It happened faster than she expected. A sudden forward movement. His fist, not a full swing, not quite, but sharp enough. It landed hard against her upper arm, catching the edge of her shoulder. Dorothy gasped and staggered back, bumping against the fridge. For a second, all she could hear was her pulse thudding in her ears. Her legs wobbled, and her mouth tasted like copper. The kitchen door cracked open. Sandra's heels clicked on the tile. "Michael," she said, her voice clipped and low. "Stop, stop. Don't make a scene." Dorothy stared at her, wide-eyed. Sandra didn't meet her gaze. "She's fine," Michael muttered, pacing now. "God, can we just eat dinner like normal people?" Dorothy pressed her hand against the throbbing spot where he'd hit her. It was already starting to swell. Her shoulder pulsed, heat radiating outward. "Ma," Sandra said again, a little firmer. "Don't start something." Not in front of Emily. Dorothy's throat locked. She didn't see," she whispered, the lie cold and sour in her mouth. She pulled her sweater tighter around her, swallowed the lump in her throat, and walked out of the kitchen. Back in the dining room, Emily was already seated, her hair in a neat braid and her eyes flicking nervously between the mashed potatoes and the empty chair at the head of the table. Dorothy sat down slowly, careful not to jostle her arm. The smell of garlic bread made her stomach turn. Michael followed a beat later, clapping his hands like nothing had happened. "All right, let's say grace and eat before it gets cold." Dorothy kept her head bowed longer than usual, eyes clenched shut as Michael muttered some half-hearted blessing across the table. She could feel the heat blooming under her sweater sleeve, the ache spreading like bruised fruit. Halfway through dinner, a small hand brushed her elbow. Emily leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Grandma, I saw." Dorothy's fork froze midair. Emily didn't look at her, just reached for the salt shaker as if she hadn't said anything at all. But her tiny hand trembled. Dorothy felt her world tilt, just slightly, but enough to know it would never sit the same again. Outside, the wind hit the windows like breath held too long. Inside, the silence was back, but now it was shared. And somewhere beneath the table, Dorothy's fingers tightened in her lap. He hit her. And someone finally saw. Dorothy sat at the edge of her bed, the room lit only by the weak glow of the bedside lamp. The house was still, the kind of still that makes every clock tick sound louder. She had made it home without crying, barely. The air in her bedroom felt too clean for what clung to her skin. She pulled off her sweater carefully, wincing as the sleeve grazed her shoulder. The bruise was angry now, deep violet, already blooming outward in messy petals. She ran 2 fingers along the swelling, then pulled her hand away like she'd touched a flame. She reached into her nightstand drawer and pulled out a small black notebook. Its pages were nearly full. Grocery lists, utility bill notes, a few recipes clipped from the back of soup cans. But she flipped past all of that to the very last empty page. September 3rd. Michael, kitchen, arm and shoulder, closed fist. Witness, Sandra. Her pen hovered. Then she added, said I slipped. Again. Dorothy shut the notebook with a soft snap. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone on the nightstand. It took a few seconds to open the camera app, her vision watery. She turned her shoulder toward the mirror and angled the phone with practiced care. Click. The first photo caught the harsh purple under the overhead light. Click. The second, with flash, made it look even worse. Click. The third with her watch in frame, 6:42 p.m., just like last time. She stared at the images, her thumb hovering over the delete button. But instead, she tapped save. Then she created a folder. Insurance, she called it. Tucked it between recipes and church music. By Wednesday, the bruise had started to darken at the edges, the yellow creeping in like a slow rot. She'd worn a zip-up hoodie to the bowling alley, but Joan saw anyway. They were standing by the score console between frames, sipping diet sodas and pretending not to care who was winning. Joan reached for the napkins and paused mid-reach. Her voice dropped. That wasn't a fall. Dorothy didn't flinch, didn't deny it, didn't nod. Joan turned to face her fully, eyes narrowing. Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen plenty of falls. That bruise is a man's hand. Dorothy swallowed hard, throat tight. The sounds of clattering pins and distant laughter felt like they were coming from underwater. She didn't say it loudly, didn't make a scene. My own son, she said. Joan blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She placed her soda down, slower than usual. Then stop protecting him, Joan said, her voice suddenly steady. Protect yourself. Dorothy looked away, but Joan reached out and gently covered her wrist. Her hand was warm, firm. No more pretending, Joan said. You don't owe him silence. That night, Emily's text came through while Dorothy was folding laundry. Emily. He said you slipped on the kitchen tile. Emily. But I know you didn't. Emily. I saw the way he looked at you after. Like it wasn't the first time. Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed. The same bed, same lamp, same folded sweater sitting at the foot. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What do you say to that? To a child who knows too much, too early. She typed slowly, Grandma. I'm okay now, Grandma. I promise. Then she deleted it. Instead, she took a deep breath and texted just one word, Grandma. Thank you. The reply came a moment later, as soft as a whisper. Emily, I believe you. Dorothy felt her eyes sting. Not from pain this time, but something else. Something older. She opened her notebook again. Under the last entry, she scribbled 3 new words. Emily believes. Me. She put the pen down, closed the book, and stood up. For the first time in weeks, she looked in the mirror, not at the bruise, but at herself. And for the first time in years, she didn't look away. Dorothy had always been a morning person, but lately, mornings came with dread. A quiet sort of dread, the kind you don't speak aloud. She poured herself half a cup of black coffee and stared out the window as the neighbor's sprinkler wheezed to life. The bruise still ached beneath her sleeve. She hadn't used her debit card in 5 days, not since Michael grabbed her arm. She was sure of it. So when she opened her statement and saw a $94 charge from a dive bar on 5th Street, Mickey's Tap, Her fingers froze on the touchpad. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m., 2 days after the dinner. Her hand shook as she reached for the phone. The automated voice at the credit union gave her 4 options before connecting her to a human. "This is Frank Morales at Midtown Credit Union. How can I assist?" "Hi," Dorothy said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I need to report unauthorized activity on my checking account." Pause. The sound of keyboard clicks on the other end. "You're Dorothy Keller, right? I'm pulling up your profile now. Give me just a second." She listened to the tapping, heart knocking hard in her chest. "Yeah, I see it. Mickey's tap. You're saying this wasn't you." "I haven't used my card all week." Frank exhaled through his nose. She could almost picture him leaning forward, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "Mind if I ask, does anyone else have access to your card?" Dorothy hesitated. Then, "My son. He's staying nearby." More silence, then softer tapping. "I'm going to flag the transaction," Frank said. "Put a temporary hold on the card until we verify some things." Dorothy's breath escaped in a small puff. "Thank you." After they hung up, she sat at her kitchen table, printing the transaction logs from her bank portal. She slipped them into a manila folder marked House Receipts, crossed it out, and wrote Financial. Later that afternoon, she sat across from Michael in the living room, the receipts folded neatly in her lap. He looked up from his phone with that practiced blankness she hated. "What now? You used my card." Michael squinted like he didn't understand the words. "What are you talking about?" "At Mickey's. 2 nights ago, he leaned back, spreading his arms across the back of the couch. Ma, you're confused. Maybe you left it somewhere. I didn't." His smile was cold. "Maybe you forgot you went." Dorothy's hands gripped the receipts tighter, crinkling the edges. "I didn't forget anything." "Well," Michael shrugged. "Then it's your word against a bar receipt." Good luck proving anything. She stood up. As she walked out, she heard him mutter, "Jesus, this again." At league night, Joan noticed the folder before she even noticed Dorothy. "You starting a paper trail or filing for sainthood?" Dorothy gave a tired smile and handed her the manila envelope. Joan opened it, flipped through the bank receipts. "Let me guess. He says this is all in your head?" Dorothy nodded once. Joan shook her head slowly. "Seen or not, he's stealing you blind." Dorothy pressed her lips together. The bowling alley lights were too bright, the voices around her too loud. And yet, she felt alone in the middle of it all. Until Joan looked up again and gave her a look that said, "I see you." And somehow that helped. "Make copies," Joan said. "Put them in 3 different places. If he gets wind, he'll try to erase the evidence." That night, while Dorothy was washing dishes, her phone buzzed on the windowsill. "Emily. He told Mom you're losing it." "Emily. He said you made it all up." "Emily. Grandma, keep everything, please." Dorothy dried her hands slowly, reached for the phone and stared at the screen. She felt the pull, old habits, old instincts, to shrug it off, to let it go, to forgive and forget. But not this time. She opened the financial folder again, slid in the latest printout. Then she pulled a Sharpie from the junk drawer and wrote across the front, "Keep everything." The doorbell rang. Dorothy flinched. The clock read 8:09 p.m. Too late for packages, too early for church friends. And she already knew who it was. The following Monday, Dorothy was out back clipping the dead hydrangea heads when the call came. "Mrs. Keller? This is Frank Morales again." From the credit union, Dorothy stood straight, garden shears still in one gloved hand. Something in his tone bristled. Too polite, too measured. "I need you to come in. Today, if you can," he said. "There's something you should see." She didn't ask what. She didn't need to. Her gut already told her. The credit union lobby was colder than usual, or maybe that was just the way the fluorescent lights bounced off the linoleum, making everything look too clean, too empty. Frank met her at the door, his tie slightly crooked, eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I appreciate you coming on short notice," he said. guiding her past the customer counters toward his office in the back. "Please sit." Dorothy lowered herself into the vinyl chair. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Frank opened a folder labeled Account Modification Request and slid a single sheet across the desk. Her name was printed at the top. Below it, a request to add a co-signer, Michael Keller, and at the bottom, a signature. It looked like hers, almost. But the D curved too wide, and the tail of the R didn't hook like she always wrote it. The handwriting trembled with mimicry. It wanted to be hers, but it wasn't. Frank watched her carefully. "You recognize this?" Dorothy looked up slowly. "That's not my signature." "You're sure?" She nodded once. "Positive." Frank flipped the page over, revealing her official signature card on file. The difference was plain now. Side by side, it looked amateurish. "He submitted it Friday morning," Frank said, along with a form to gain full access to the account. "If I hadn't flagged your profile after the Mickey's charge, it might have gone through." Dorothy felt her stomach churn. "So what happens now?" she asked. "We've denied the request," Frank said firmly, "and we're freezing any pending changes to your accounts until we get something on file protecting you. I also need you to sign this, just confirming the forgery." He slid over another form. Dorothy signed. This time, her D curved exactly as it should. At home that evening, Dorothy sat at her dining table with a fresh folder. Fraud. September 9th written in neat black ink. The forged form went in first, the denial letter next. She added the comparison sheet with the handwriting samples and clicked the folder shut. She stared at it for a long moment before pulling out her notebook again. "Michael forged my signature, tried to take control of my account, caught just in time." She drew a line beneath it, then boxed the date. "Now you've got leverage," Jones said the next morning, sipping coffee out of a chipped mug in Dorothy's kitchen. "That's not just lying. That's criminal," Dorothy nodded. "He thinks this is all invisible. That I'll just let it happen," Jones scoffed. "Honey, invisible things still leave bruises." Some worse than fists. Dorothy didn't speak. She didn't have to. The bruise was nearly gone now, but the memory had found a second skin. Joan leaned in. "Go down to the police station. File an incident report. You've got enough paper to make it stick." Dorothy hesitated, then nodded once, slowly. Joan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Good. Now let him be the one explaining himself for once." That night, as Dorothy got ready for bed, a new message popped up on her phone. This time from Emily. It was a screenshot. "Michael, 10:17 p.m. I'm gonna get everything soon anyway. Her money's basically mine. One signature, and I'm in. Watch." Emily's message followed. "Emily, he's bragging about it now. Thought you should see." Dorothy stared at the screen, her breath catching. She reread the text. Then again. She didn't know what clenched tighter, her stomach or her resolve. She saved the screenshot, added it to a new folder. Texts. Then, without looking away, she whispered aloud to herself, "You just put that in writing." Her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Michael, why'd you go to the bank today? Michael, you trying to make me look bad?" Dorothy stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blouse. The bruise on her shoulder was gone now, just faint yellow remnants buried beneath fabric and time. But she'd learned. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. She grabbed her leather folder, the one labeled Fraud, September 9th, and slipped it into her purse beside the smaller, heavier envelope marked Will. Then she locked the front door and drove to the credit union without calling ahead. Frank glanced up from his desk as she entered. "Mrs. Keller," he said, standing. "Or can I call you Dorothy now?" "Dorothy's fine," she replied, her voice calm. Clear? Sharper than he'd heard it before. Frank gestured to the chair across from him. "How can I help today?" She set the folder on his desk, hands steady. "I want to close everything tied to that old account," she said. "Transfer every cent into something new. Private, no joint access, no online logins, just me." Frank blinked. "You sure you want to go that route?" "It'll take a little legwork. I'm sure. He gave a small nod, already pulling up her information on the monitor. Okay, we can set up a new checking and savings, build in alerts, give you a dedicated contact line. I'll be your watch point. Any activity that looks suspicious, even a login attempt, you'll know. Dorothy took a breath. Good. Redirect my pension while you're at it. And Social Security, too. Frank tapped a few keys, then glanced up. You want the old account shut down? No, she said. Leave it open. Move $5 into it. Enough to keep it alive, but not useful. Frank let out a soft chuckle. Like bait. Dorothy's lips lifted faintly. Exactly. He leaned back in his chair, respect written plainly across his face. I'll take care of it. That night, Dorothy sat across from Joan at the kitchen table, a fresh pot of coffee steaming between them. Outside, the porch light hummed. Inside, the tension had settled into something colder, clearer. Joan flipped through the printed transfer receipts, whistling under her breath. Well, damn, you actually did it, I did. You just locked that boy out of the vault and tossed the key into Lake Erie. Dorothy poured sugar into her mug, stirring slowly. I left him something. Joan raised a brow. Dorothy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. $5. Let him fish in an empty pond, Joan laughed. Short and sharp. He's gonna lose his mind. I know. Joan sipped her coffee, then leaned forward. You gonna tell him? No. Dorothy folded one document and slid it into her binder. He'll find out when he tries to feed off it again. 2 days later, Dorothy sat in the office of Arthur Gentry, the estate attorney who'd done her paperwork since Tom passed away. He wore a charcoal blazer and had a habit of pushing his glasses up his nose before every sentence. You want Michael removed entirely? Yes. And you'd like your granddaughter to be listed as heir? Dorothy nodded. With stipulations. She doesn't get full control until she's 25. Until then, I want oversight from Frank Morales at the bank and Joan White as personal advisor. Arthur adjusted his glasses. You've thought this through. I've lived this through. She slid a second envelope across the desk. Inside, Emily's text screenshots. The forged form. Photos of the bruise, receipts, a tiny arsenal in black and white. I want this on file, so when he contests it, and he will, you'll know why Arthur opened the envelope. Leaf through the papers. His eyebrows rose slightly. Understood. Back home, Dorothy placed the updated will in her safe, clicked the dial, and slid the key back onto her chain. Then she picked up her phone and texted Emily, Grandma, you're in the will now, you and no one else. Emily's reply came instantly. Emily, why are you crying, Grandma? Dorothy stared at the screen, surprised to feel her cheeks wet. Grandma, because for once, I'm not scared of him anymore. That night, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Blocked caller ID. Voicemail left, 37 seconds long. Her hand hovered over the play button. Then she pressed it. The voicemail had ended with silence. No threats, no screaming. Just that chilling, deliberate pause before the line cut off. But it wasn't quiet where he was. 3 miles away, at a sticky oak bar in the back corner of Mickey's Tap, Michael Keller was red-faced and sweating. Run it again, he snapped, slapping the card down for the 3rd time. The bartender gave him a measured look, unimpressed by his tone or his crumpled hoodie. Already did. It's declined. Michael leaned over the counter, his voice dropping into something more dangerous. There's money in there, plenty. I know there is. The bartender glanced at the display, still flashing red. Then call your bank, man. But this card's dead. A couple at the end of the bar turned their heads. Someone snickered. Michael's jaw tightened. This is bullshit. He swept his arm across the bar in a sudden lash, sending a stack of drink coasters and a bowl of pretzels crashing to the floor. A few people jumped. One woman pulled out her phone. Hey, the bartender barked. You break anything else, I'm calling the cops. Michael blinked hard, chest heaving. His knuckles were white against the countertop. But behind the rage in his eyes, something sharper cut through, confusion, then panic. He backed away from the bar without another word, card clenched in his fist, and stormed out into the night. Dorothy heard the banging before she saw the shadow at the door. It started as a fist, then a full open palm slap, then the heel of something hard, maybe a boot, maybe the bottom of a flashlight, slamming against the wood. She didn't flinch. She stayed exactly where she was, crouched in the dark of her hallway, phone already recording through the peephole. "You ruined me," Michael's voice cracked. "You think this is funny? You think this is justice? I can't buy gas, can't get a drink, can't even get into my own goddamn account." Dorothy didn't speak, didn't respond. "You little snake," he spat. "You went to the bank behind my back. Changed everything, like I wouldn't notice." More pounding. His voice rose louder with each word, but the sound had lost its edge of control. Now it was desperation with teeth. "I took care of you," he howled. "I helped you. And this is what I get?" Dorothy slowly panned the camera, making sure it caught every word, every ugly syllable, every stomp of his boots on her front porch. Lights flicked on across the street. Curtains moved. A porch door opened 2 houses down. Still, she didn't speak. She backed up quietly from the door and dialed 911, keeping the video rolling. "Yes," she whispered to the dispatcher. "It's my son. He's outside my door, threatening me. I have it on video. He's screaming and pounding. Please send someone." By the time she hung up, Michael's voice had turned ragged. "You think Emily's gonna thank you for this?" he shouted. "You think she's gonna see you as some kind of saint?" He kicked the door one last time, hard. Then silence. Dorothy waited. 10 seconds. 20. She peeked through the peephole. He was gone, but the police weren't far behind. The squad car pulled up just as she opened the door. The young officer, mid-30s, buzz-cut, cautious eyes, asked if she had footage. Dorothy handed him the phone. The whole thing. Her hands didn't shake this time. He watched the video in silence, the flickering porch light painting him in cold white strokes. His jaw tightened when Michael's voice screamed through the tiny speaker. "Would you like to press charges?" the officer asked gently. Dorothy paused, then shook her head. "Not yet. I just want this documented," he nodded. "It will be." Officially, as he turned to leave, the officer added, "If he comes back, don't open the door. Just call us." Dorothy shut the door behind him and locked it twice. Joan showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and 3 questions in her eyes. "I heard," she said quietly. Dorothy took the coffee, sat down, and opened the folder she'd labeled Threats, Audio. She played the voicemail, then showed Joan the video. Joan didn't speak for a while, just stared at the screen, mouth pressed thin. "Scenes cut both ways," she finally muttered. Dorothy looked at her. Joan nodded slowly. "He's not the only one who knows how to make an entrance." The envelope came on a Tuesday. Thick, heavy, cream-colored with a courthouse return address stamped in ink. Dorothy stared at it for a full minute before opening it at the kitchen table with a paring knife, her hands surprisingly steady. Petition for adult guardianship. Filed by Michael Thomas Keller. Claim: incapacity to manage personal financial affairs. Her breath left her body in a slow, stunned exhale. He wasn't done. He was escalating. "Christ almighty," Joan muttered when Dorothy handed her the letter. "He's trying to get control through the courts now?" Dorothy nodded. "He's claiming I'm mentally unfit to manage my own money." Joan's eyes flashed. "After everything he's pulled? That's rich. He thinks it'll look official." On paper, Joan smacked the back of the letter with the flat of her hand. "He's betting on silence." "On you not fighting back," Dorothy took the letter back, folded it slowly, and slid it into her legal pending folder. "I'm not staying silent." The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. No gallery pews or jury box. Just beige walls, plastic chairs, and the low hum of a rattling ceiling vent. Michael sat 2 rows away in a dark suit that looked borrowed. His eyes were bloodshot. His lawyer, some dull-eyed man named Peavy, whispered something to him before the hearing began. Michael didn't look at Dorothy, but Emily did. She sat beside Dorothy, legs crossed, her school backpack tucked under the chair, hair freshly brushed. She gave Dorothy's hand a small squeeze. "I'm right here," she whispered. The judge entered, older, with a mustache like steel wool and a gold pen clipped to his robe. He skimmed the case file with practiced disinterest. Petition brought forth by Mr. Keller against his mother, Miss Dorothy Keller, requesting appointment of a guardian due to suspected financial incapacity. Dorothy sat up straighter. Her binder was open in her lap, color-coded tabs, printed statements, labeled receipts. A row of manila folders sat beside her. The judge turned to a silver-haired woman seated near the clerk's table. "We'll begin with the psychiatric evaluation." Dr. Mendez stood, crisp navy suit, sensible heels. She adjusted her glasses and glanced briefly at Dorothy before speaking. "I conducted a competency evaluation of Ms. Keller last Thursday," she began. "Her cognitive responses were not only appropriate, they exceeded expectations for her age." She glanced down at her notes. She maintains a balanced checkbook, independently manages 2 separate accounts, was able to recall recent transactions and their corresponding vendors from memory. No signs of confusion, dementia, or impaired judgment. She closed the folder with a soft snap. "In my professional opinion, she is entirely capable of handling her own finances." Michael shifted, shoulders stiffening. The judge turned his gaze to Dorothy. "Would you like to speak, ma'am?" Dorothy stood slowly, setting her binder on the table like a weapon. "I've documented every financial decision I've made over the last 6 months," she said. "Every penny accounted for, every check reconciled, every unauthorized charge reported." She held up the forged signature comparison. "This was my son's doing. He filed this petition after I shut down his access. This isn't about my health. It's about retaliation." Then she sat. The judge nodded, turned to Emily. "Miss Keller, you're listed as a witness. Would you like to say anything?" Emily stood, cleared her throat. "She's the sharpest one here," she said plainly. "Smarter than me, smarter than him." She nodded toward Michael. "He's just mad she stopped letting him take things." There was a pause, not of awkwardness, but clarity. The judge scribbled something with the gold pen, looked up again. "Petition denied." Just like that. Outside, Frank Morales stood by the parking meter, arms crossed. He'd shown up in case they needed a statement, but they didn't. "You all right?" he asked as Dorothy approached. "I'm fine," she said. He looked past her toward the courthouse doors. He really thought he'd win this. "He underestimated me," she replied. Frank smiled. "Good. Let him keep doing that." Dorothy slipped her folder back into her tote bag. "Every time he bets against me, he gives me more to work with." That evening, Dorothy opened her mailbox to find a small white envelope addressed in Michael's handwriting. No return address. She opened it anyway. Inside, a single note scrawled in thick black pen. "You won this round." But it's not over. The toolbox had been in the garage since Tom died. 37 years of rusting sockets and steel wrenches, some older than Michael himself. Dorothy didn't use them, but she never moved them either. They were part of the bones of the house. So when she reached for a box of light bulbs one Saturday and saw the red Craftsman chest gone, her body froze mid-step. She blinked, looked again. Empty space, dust shadow on the concrete, 2 circular drag marks where the rollers had been pulled across the floor. Her mouth went dry. Dorothy paced the garage, one hand braced on her hip, the other tapping her phone against her thigh. There was only one person who'd been in that garage in weeks. Only one who knew the side door lock hadn't been fixed yet. Michael. She opened her banking folder and flipped to the back, where she'd tucked a thin stack of pawnshop flyers Joan had handed her months ago. "You ever think he's selling things off the books?" Joan had asked back then. Dorothy hadn't wanted to believe it, but now she did. She called the first pawnshop on the list, then the second, the third. At the fourth, she struck gold. "Yeah, we had a red Craftsman chest come in last Tuesday," the clerk said. "Real heavy thing. You looking to buy it back?" "Not yet," Dorothy said calmly. "Can you tell me who sold it?" Hold on. Shuffling papers. A beep. Then, guy named Michael Keller. Signed with ID. I can fax the receipt if you want. Yes, Dorothy said. Please do. At the kitchen table, the fax machine wheezed and clicked as the page came through. Dorothy leaned in, reading every line like a contract. Item: Craftsman Rolling Tool, Chest Seller, Michael Keller. Date: September 16th. Amount paid: $65. ID verified. Her eyes narrowed at the signature. It was definitely his. She slipped the receipt into a new folder labeled Theft Garage, then pulled her phone from her pocket and called the precinct. This is Dorothy Keller. I need to report a theft from my home. By the time Joan arrived, Dorothy had a full coffee pot brewing and every manila folder spread out across the dining table like a military blueprint. Well, damn, Joan muttered, eyeing the labels. You building a legal nuke? Dorothy handed her the pawn receipt. He took Tom's toolbox. Joan read it, her mouth tightening. Pawned it for $65? 2 days after the court hearing, Joan sat, hard. He didn't get your accounts, didn't win the petition, so now he's just taking, Dorothy nodded. He's unraveling. Joan tapped the paper. This is criminal. No more gray areas. This isn't financial manipulation. This is theft. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, then picked up her phone and dialed Frank. At Midtown Credit Union, Frank didn't even wait for her to sit. He pulled a blank affidavit from his drawer and clicked his pen. You want this documented? He asked. I want this backed, Dorothy said. Frank nodded. We'll build it like a case, list the timeline, link the banking fraud, forgery, the bar charge, the guardianship petition. Now this. It's a pattern, one I'm willing to sign off on. He started drafting, his handwriting fast and sharp. Dorothy watched the words take shape on the page. Ongoing pattern of financial exploitation by family member. For the first time in weeks, her heartbeat slowed. Frank glanced up. Once this affidavit's filed, it moves everything into a new category. Not just elder abuse, it's premeditated fraud. Dorothy looked down at her hands. They were still, calm, no more trembling. She met Frank's gaze. Then let's file it. Back at home, Joan stared at her from across the kitchen table as Dorothy sorted the new affidavit into the binder. You're calm, Joan said slowly. Dorothy exhaled. I've been afraid so long, I forgot what it feels like not to be. Joan raised her coffee in a small salute. Now you've got him cornered. Dorothy nodded, a quiet fire behind her eyes. I'm ready. The next morning, as Dorothy clipped coupons in the breakfast nook, her phone buzzed with a new voicemail alert. Blocked caller, no transcript available, 36 seconds. She tapped play. Dorothy stood outside courtroom 3B, hands clutching her binder so tightly the plastic creaked. Frank stood to her left, thumb scrolling calmly through his phone. Joan was on the other side, arms crossed, her expression locked between fury and pride. And just behind Dorothy, Emily sat on the bench, small, still, and somehow stronger than all of them. You've got this, Emily said quietly. Dorothy gave her a faint smile, but her heart was hammering in her chest. This wasn't the probate hearing. This was criminal court. This was real. Inside, the courtroom was larger than the last. Wood-paneled walls, an actual gallery, and the smell of varnish and nerves. Michael sat across the aisle in a wrinkled blazer, jaw clenched, eyes darting. His lawyer wasn't peevy this time. It was a younger man with no briefcase and too much cologne. The judge entered, a woman in her early 60s. Sharp eyes. Behind reading glasses and a gavel that didn't look like it was for decoration. State of Ohio versus Michael Keller, the bailiff called. Dorothy didn't look at him, not once. The prosecution called her first. She took the stand with her binder in hand and a steel rod down her spine. I'm Dorothy Keller. I'm 74 years old. Retired secretary, widow, mother. Her voice didn't tremble. The prosecutor gestured for her to open the binder. Dorothy did, slowly, carefully, and turned to the first tab. Photographs. These were taken the night of the incident, she said, her voice even. You'll see the bruising on my shoulder and upper arm. She handed them to the bailiff. The judge studied them for a long moment. And this, the prosecutor asked, pointing to the next tab. Bank statements, Dorothy answered, showing unauthorized charges. One from a bar, one forged document where he tried to gain access to my account. I have handwriting comparisons here. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear her page turns. The prosecutor gave her a soft nod, then turned to the judge. We'd also like to submit a notarized affidavit from Mr. Frank Morales, the financial manager who assisted Mrs. Keller in securing her accounts and documenting the exploitation. Frank stepped forward, offered his papers, and answered every question with calm professionalism. This wasn't a one-time misunderstanding, he said. It was a deliberate and escalating pattern. Michael began tapping his foot, then his knee. His jaw twitched. Then came Emily. She looked tiny in the witness chair. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor. But when the prosecutor asked, "Did you witness anything happen between your grandmother and your uncle that night?" she didn't hesitate. "I saw him hit her," Emily said, voice clear and high. "In the kitchen. He thought I wasn't looking, but I was." Michael exploded. "That's a goddamn lie." He lunged to stand, knocking his chair backward. "She's been poisoning that kid's head for months." The bailiff stepped in fast, hand out. "Sir, sit down. I'm her son," he roared, voice cracked and wild. "She's setting me up. All of you, this is bullshit." "Mr. Keller," the judge barked, "one more outburst and you will be removed." Michael kept ranting until the bailiff placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Touch me again and I'll—" But he didn't get to finish. The bailiff cuffed him calmly, and Michael's lawyer just sank lower in his seat. The judge's voice cut through the chaos like ice. "In light of the evidence presented, photographic documentation, financial records, testimony from both a certified banking officer and a minor witness, I find this to be a clear and deliberate case of elder financial abuse and assault." Dorothy held her breath. "I hereby order Mr. Keller to pay full restitution to Mrs. Keller, as assessed by her financial institution. In addition, a no-contact restraining order is issued effective immediately. Violation of that order will result in jail time." Michael said nothing, just sat, cuffed, sweating in his chair. Dorothy stood, binder in hand, spine unbroken. Outside the courthouse, Joan pulled off her sunglasses and raised an eyebrow. "Seen enough for you?" Dorothy looked down the courthouse steps, where Michael was being loaded into a cruiser, still shouting at no one in particular. "Yeah," she said softly. "It'll do." Joan patted her shoulder. "You know what comes next, right?" Dorothy nodded. "I rebuild." The email came 2 days after the hearing. Subject line: Employment Status Review. Immediate action required. Michael sat on the edge of his unmade couch bed in the apartment he'd been squatting in since Sandra told him not to come back. The message was cold, clinical. Due to recent legal proceedings and verified documentation of financial misconduct involving a vulnerable adult, your employment is hereby suspended, pending full investigation. Please do not report to the site until further notice. Michael stared at the screen. For once, even he couldn't scream. Dorothy first heard the news from Frank. He called mid-morning, right as she was filing old phone bills into her household paid binder. His voice was calm, but she heard something beneath it. "His employer contacted me," Frank said. "They received the public court records." HR flagged it immediately. Dorothy sat down at the table. "He's suspended?" "Until they finish the investigation." "With the restraining order in place and a theft case still open." "I'd say it won't be temporary," Dorothy nodded. "Thank you for telling me," Frank hesitated. "That's not all." Emily reached out. Dorothy's breath hitched. "Is she all right?" "She's fine," he said. "But she asked if she could stay with you for a while," said her mom's siding with Michael. "Things at home aren't calm." Dorothy didn't even pause. "Tell her to pack a bag." That night, Emily arrived with a duffel bag, a pillow, and eyes that had already stopped asking for permission. Dorothy opened the door wide. No questions, no conditions. Emily stepped in and didn't let go of the hug for a long time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Dorothy shook her head. "You don't apologize for telling the truth." 2 mornings later, Sandra showed up. Dorothy didn't need to open the door to know it was her. The knock was sharp, precise, like everything Sandra did when she was furious, but trying to look composed. Dorothy opened the door halfway and didn't step aside. Sandra stood there in a tan blazer and sunglasses, lips pinched so tightly they barely moved. "You destroyed him," she said. Dorothy didn't blink. "He did that himself. You didn't have to take it this far. Air everything in court like we're some kind of... He forged my signature, drained my account, put hands on me in your kitchen." Sandra looked away. Dorothy leaned forward, voice quiet and sharp. "You stood there and told me not to make a scene. Well, guess what, Sandra?" "That scene saved my life," Sandra didn't reply. Dorothy closed the door slowly, softly, with finality. Later that day, Frank sat at the kitchen table with Dorothy and Emily, a laptop open between them. His tie was loose and his sleeves were rolled, half banker, half ally. "We can move the funds into a designated college trust," he explained. "You'll be the primary trustee, and I'll set up oversight. That way, if anything happens to you before she turns 25, the account's protected." Emily looked at Dorothy. "Are you sure?" Dorothy squeezed her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Frank nodded. "The initial deposit is strong. Add to it monthly if you'd like." Either way, she's covered. Emily's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." Dorothy didn't say, "You're welcome." She said, "You earned it." That night, Dorothy sat by the window with a cup of tea, the house quiet but full of safety, of future, of earned peace. Emily had fallen asleep with a library book open on her chest. Joan had called earlier just to say she was proud. Frank had already filed the trust documents and emailed the confirmation. Things were clicking into place. But as Dorothy sipped her tea, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No voicemail this time. Just a text. "You think this is over?" It's not. Her hand tightened on the mug. She took a breath, steady, unafraid. And then, for the first time in weeks, she blocked the number without hesitation. The bank was unusually crowded for a Thursday morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A line of customers zigzagged between velvet ropes, murmuring to one another, stamping feet, checking phones. Dorothy took a seat near the windows, her purse in her lap, her spine straight. Frank had texted her 20 minutes earlier. "Final paperwork ready." Come when you're ready to sign. She'd chosen this exact time on purpose. As the minutes ticked by, Dorothy scanned the lobby, young mother bouncing a toddler, a man in scrubs on break, a high schooler with a check to cash. Life, normal and mundane, moved around her, while something else, something inevitable, closed in. She didn't flinch when the glass doors burst open. Michael stormed inside like a storm-made flesh, sweat-slick hair, crumpled shirt, eyes blazing with something unhinged. The second he saw her across the room, his voice cracked through the quiet like a whip. "You think you can just erase me?" Dorothy didn't move, heads turned. He stomped toward her, pointing. "You locked me out of everything. You lied to the courts. You made me look like a damn criminal." Frank appeared instantly from behind the teller line, clipboard in hand, tie slightly off-center. "Sir," he said evenly, "you need to lower your voice." Michael spun to face him. You're the one feeding her this shit. You turned her against me." Frank didn't blink. "You need to leave." Michael's laugh was cracked glass. "I'm not going anywhere until I get my accounts back. She's not even mentally fit." Dorothy stood. The entire lobby fell silent. Every head swiveled. Dorothy's voice rang out, clear, firm, and without apology. "This man steals from his own mother." No one spoke. "He drained my accounts, forged my signature, Sold my husband's tools for $65. And now he's here, again, trying to take what doesn't belong to him. Michael froze, his mouth opened, then closed, stunned by the simple public truth of it. "You're lying," he said weakly, his voice faltering. You're making me look crazy." "You're doing that yourself," Dorothy replied. Frank raised one hand, subtle but firm, toward the glass-walled office by the vault. Security moved fast. 2 plainclothes officers the bank kept for emergencies, stepping out of their booth like shadows come alive. One of them gestured to the camera above the lobby. "You're being recorded," he said. Michael turned, eyes wild. "She's ruining my life." "You already did," Dorothy said, voice cold now. "And you don't get to rewrite that." The guards reached him, and for a second, he resisted, jerking one arm free, snarling something unintelligible. That was enough. They cuffed him quietly. People stepped back. Phones came out. Customers stared, frozen mid-transaction. Michael looked around the room, seeing it finally, the eyes, the silence, the way the world had shifted out from under him. "Mom," he tried, but the word came out like a plea from a boy no one remembered. Dorothy didn't move, didn't reply. Frank stood beside her, clipboard still in hand. As the guards led Michael past the doors, Frank leaned in. "Lobby cameras." Caught every word. Dorothy nodded. "Is the trust ready?" she asked. Frank smiled. "Just waiting on your signature." She walked toward the office without looking back. In the private conference room, Frank handed her the final documents. "This locks everything. No more loopholes, no more ways," and Dorothy signed each page slowly, carefully. When she was done, she handed him the pen and sat back in the leather chair, exhaling. Frank collected the papers and tapped them into a neat stack. "You good?" She glanced out through the glass wall, where the lobby had returned to its quiet rhythm, bank tellers smiling, customers chatting softly. "Yes," she said. Then, after a pause, "He told me not to make a scene." Frank chuckled. "You made the right kind." The newspaper hit driveways across town before sunrise, folded neatly in plastic sleeves, headline bold and black across the front page. "Local man charged in financial abuse case against mother, restraining order issued." After bank outburst caught on video, Dorothy didn't need to see it to know. The call started by 8:15. First, Ruth from her quilting group, then Pastor Jean's assistant asking if she was okay and needed a ride to Sunday service. By noon, Joan had texted a photo of the article with 3 exclamation marks and a message. Front page, no skips, all truth. At 12:42, Sandra's name lit up Dorothy's phone. She let it ring, then again, 5 minutes later, this time a voicemail. Dorothy played it on speaker while standing in the kitchen. She couldn't even face the choir today. Sandra's voice trembled. "You made a public spectacle of this family. Couldn't keep it private, could you? You had to humiliate him." "And us." Dorothy deleted the message before it finished. Emily found the paper folded at the edge of the porch when she got home from school. She peeled off the plastic, sat cross-legged on the steps, and stared at her uncle's photo beneath the headline. "Wow," she whispered. She walked inside, holding it like something sacred. "Grandma," she said, holding up the front page. Dorothy looked up from the dining table, where she was organizing receipts into one of her final folders. "You told the truth," Emily said. Dorothy took the paper gently from her hands and smiled, small and quiet. "So did you." Emily leaned in and hugged her, hard. No words, just warmth and presence. Outside, wind rolled leaves down the street. Inside, Dorothy breathed deep and stood taller. Joan arrived that evening with a pair of scissors, a half-finished scrapbook, and a Ziploc bag full of her famous lemon bars. "I brought supplies," she said, unzipping her tote. "You're officially page 73. Dorothy laughed. "You keep a scrapbook of what? Local revenge?" "Of victories," Joan replied. "Big or small?" "This one," she patted the paper. "Monumental." They sat at the table together as Joan clipped the article carefully, smoothing the creases. The photos were clear. Michael yelling in the bank lobby, Frank motioning toward security, Dorothy standing with her purse in hand, eyes forward. A woman holding a line. "I'm putting this next to my Marla versus HOA saga," Joan said, placing the clipping with reverence. Dorothy shook her head. "You're a menace." "I'm a historian," Joan said, biting into a lemon bar. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet again, Dorothy sat at her desk and opened her binder labeled Final Records. She added a new divider tab, Media Coverage. The article slipped perfectly into a plastic sleeve. She smoothed the edges, pressed it flat, then wrote in neat pen beneath it. The truth, printed. The silence, broken. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was Frank. "Just finished reviewing everything again," he said. "No breaches. No suspicious activity. All accounts are secure." Dorothy nodded, eyes on the binder. "Thank you, Frank." "You did it," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "We did it." They hung up, and Dorothy sat for a moment longer, hand resting on the page, like it was a letter she'd written to her future self. She closed the binder slowly. The lock clicked shut. The next morning, Dorothy opened the mailbox and found a thin white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was of Michael, sitting alone on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. His head was in his hands. A long crease folded through the image, like it had been handled too many times. On the back, in smudged black ink, "I hope you're proud." Dorothy stared at the photo, then folded it once more, smaller this time. She opened a drawer, pulled out a fresh folder, and labeled it, Guilt Tactics. Then she slid the photo inside and shut the drawer. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Gentry and Tate smelled like lemon oil and caution. Dorothy sat at the polished table in a clean gray cardigan, papers neatly arranged in front of her. Her glasses were perched low on her nose. Her expression was unflinching. Arthur Gentry, her longtime estate attorney, looked over the final draft of her new will. He adjusted his glasses, read the last paragraph aloud, then paused. "Are you ready to sign, Dorothy?" "I was ready 10 years ago," she said, "but I didn't have the spine for it then." He nodded slowly and passed her the pen. She signed, one stroke after another, clear, deliberate, no hesitation. Arthur slid the page toward the notary, who was already flipping through her ledger. Joan. She wore a navy blue blazer and lipstick 1 shade bolder than usual. "Full circle," she said, uncapping her pen. "You finally putting it all in ink." Joan watched Dorothy sign, then added her own name and seal beside the official witness statement. Arthur glanced over the documents one last time. "To confirm, your son Michael Keller is to be removed in full, no legal. Claim, no executor rights, no inheritance." Dorothy nodded. "Correct. And in his place, your granddaughter Emily Keller, sole beneficiary with financial oversight until age 25. Dorothy smiled. "She's earned that and more." Arthur continued. "Secondary beneficiary?" Dorothy slid a single sheet across the table, typed, double-spaced, signed. "The Ashfield Community Senior Center," she said. "They saved me long before any court did. They get 10%." Arthur blinked. "That's a generous move." "It's the only one that feels clean." He leaned back. "I'll file this with the county registrar and deliver certified copies to your safe deposit box and home files. Make one more," she added, tapping the table gently, "for Emily." Joan stood up and pressed her notary seal into the final page with a clean, satisfying click. Arthur gathered the documents into a folder labeled Last Will and Testament, Final Copy. Dorothy looked at it for a long moment, not with fear or sadness, just the weight of completion. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible, "Silence is gone. Regret is permanent." Frank met them back at the house. He came in through the side door, sleeves rolled, carrying a narrow leather briefcase. Dorothy poured him coffee before he even asked. They sat in the sunroom, light pouring through the wide windows. Emily was on the floor nearby, headphones on, flipping through a college brochure. Her duffel bag had long since been replaced by a proper dresser. Her laugh came easier now. Frank unlatched the briefcase and pulled out the official trust paperwork. This secures the college fund for Emily. It names you as primary custodian. If anything happens to you before she turns 25, Joan and I act as co-guardians over the account. He handed Dorothy the final page. You stamp it, she said. Frank blinked. You sure? I've had enough men sign my life away. This time I want it sealed by someone who helped me take it back. Frank smiled faintly. Then he pressed the official Midtown Trust Bank stamp onto the bottom of the page. Clean, dark, unmovable. Dorothy exhaled as if the house itself let go of something. She placed the signed document into her newest binder, Legacy, in gold lettering. When she closed the cover, it clicked. Another lock, another door shut behind her. That evening, Emily found her sitting in the back garden, fingers brushing the herbs Tom once planted. She sat beside her without speaking for a long time. Then, "You're really done, aren't you?" Dorothy didn't answer immediately. Then she looked at her granddaughter, sunlight catching the edge of her gray hair, and said, "I'm done letting other people hold the pen." Emily smiled. "You ever gonna let me read the whole binder?" Dorothy smirked. "Maybe one day. When you're strong enough not to carry it." As night fell, the doorbell rang. Dorothy opened it slowly, carefully. An officer stood on her porch. Kind eyes, familiar face. He held a sealed envelope and a clipboard. "Sorry to bother you this late," he said. "You've been named in a legal notice filed by Michael Keller." Dorothy tilted her head. "What is it now?" The officer hesitated. "He's contesting the will." The eviction notice had gone up 2 days earlier, bright orange, taped to the cracked paint of apartment 3C. Michael had ignored it at first, just like he'd ignored the final HR email, the unpaid utility bills, the court dates that hadn't gone his way. But by Friday morning, the locks were changed. The manager stood in the hallway with 2 deputies and a clipboard, while Michael gathered what he could into a trash bag: clothes, chargers, a crumpled photo of him and Sandra at Niagara Falls. He didn't speak. Neither did they. When he walked down the stairs with the bag slung over his shoulder, no one held the door for him. He ended up on the courthouse steps, the same steps where, months ago, he'd stood tall and smug, pacing with his lawyer, smirking as Dorothy passed by on her way inside. Now he sat slouched on the stone ledge, hoodie up, shoulders hunched, the duffel at his feet like a weight he couldn't put down. He didn't look up when Dorothy passed him. She didn't stop. She wore her gray wool coat and leather gloves, binder in hand, her heels firm against the pavement. On her right side, Emily matched her step for step, a knitted scarf looped twice around her neck. They'd just come from filing the final rebuttal paperwork. Arthur Gentry had made quick work of Michael's last desperate challenge to the will. The judge hadn't even called for a hearing this time. Dorothy didn't spare Michael a glance as they passed, just the whisper of her coat hem catching the wind. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was already smaller than she'd ever seen him. Halfway down the block, Joan waited beside her sedan, thermos in hand, sunglasses pushed into her curls. "He was sitting there?" she asked. Dorothy nodded. "Same spot," Joan snorted softly. "Scene's end." "Consequences stay." Emily linked her arm through Dorothy's. "Let's go home." The words were simple, but they landed like freedom. Dorothy turned back one last time, just briefly. Michael was still there, a crumpled figure on the steps, the duffel bag barely upright beside him. She had once wept over him, once believed every promise, every apology, every "it won't happen again." Now she simply felt nothing at all. Back home, Dorothy hung her coat on the hook by the door and stepped into the living room, where sunlight poured through the windows like forgiveness. Emily slipped off her boots and disappeared into the kitchen, humming. On the coffee table, Joan had left a newspaper clipping in a plastic sleeve. Another article, this one smaller, buried on page 6. A. Just a few lines. Estate challenge dismissed without hearing. Judge affirms prior ruling in elder exploitation case. Dorothy picked it up, smiled faintly, and slid it into the final sleeve of her legacy binder. She shut it with a satisfying click. Joan appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She passed one to Dorothy. "You look taller," she said. "I feel taller," Dorothy replied. Joan grinned. "Funny what happens when you stop carrying people who were never meant to ride on your back." They sat for a moment in quiet. Then Emily padded in, holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said. "No return address." Dorothy raised an eyebrow, but opened it anyway. Inside was a single creased photo, one she'd seen before. Michael, head and hands on the courthouse steps. But this time, there was no note, just the image. No message, no plea. Just a snapshot of collapse. Dorothy stared at it for a moment. Then, without a word, she stood, walked to the kitchen trash can, and dropped it in. No folder, no label, no record. It didn't deserve one. Emily reached for Dorothy's hand as she returned to the living room. Her grip was warm, steady. "You're free," she said. Dorothy looked around, at the clean floors, the smell of lemon polish, the warmth of safety, and realized something. She was completely, finally, wonderfully free. And she smiled, full and real, for the first time in a long, long time. The smell of beef stew filled the kitchen like a promise. Dorothy stirred the pot with slow, practiced motions, the old wooden spoon in her hand worn smooth from decades of dinners. Beside her, a tray of soft rolls cooled beneath a folded towel, butter melting between their seams. She hummed under her breath, not a song exactly, just a rhythm that had returned to her in recent weeks, one she hadn't realized she'd lost. The dining table was set for 3. Joan arrived first, arms full, wine in one hand, a pie in the other. "Hope you made extra," she said, shrugging off her coat. "I skipped lunch on purpose," Dorothy grinned. "You always skip lunch on purpose." "That's strategy," Joan replied, already popping open the bottle with a practiced twist. Emily came in from the den a few minutes later, a stack of college brochures under her arm. She'd changed out of her school clothes into a hoodie that said, "Class of 2026, hair tied up, socks mismatched." She looked at home now, fully, not just physically, but in her skin, in her breath. "Smells amazing," she said, dropping the brochures and sliding into a seat. "It's giving official start of something new." Dorothy placed the stew on the table, then the bread, then sat down and exhaled. They ate slowly, stories punctuated with laughter and the clink of silverware. Joan recalled a time she'd nearly gotten banned from the bingo hall for arguing over a rigged raffle. Emily described the film class she wanted to take next semester. Dorothy listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, her voice carried. Not loud, but certain, planted. Midway through dinner, Emily looked up from her bowl and said it softly. "You made a scene." Dorothy glanced at her, brows raised. Emily smiled. "The right one." Dorothy let the words sink in. Then she nodded once, her throat tight. "Yes, I did." Later, after dishes had been cleared and pie slices served, Dorothy walked to the hallway off the kitchen. She opened the small cabinet above the laundry nook and pulled out a narrow black frame. Inside it was the newspaper clipping. Front page, edges trimmed, headline clear. "Local man charged in financial abuse case against mother restraining order. Issued after bank outburst, caught on video." She hung it on the wall just past the pantry, next to an old photograph of Tom and Emily feeding ducks in the park. Joan leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, watching her. "You sure?" she asked gently. "Yes," Dorothy said. "I want to remember that not every fight I fought was in silence." The doorbell rang around 8:30. Frank stood on the porch in a navy sweater and jeans, holding a manila envelope. "Final trust documents," he said. "Signed, sealed, logged." No gaps. Dorothy stepped aside to let him in. "How long have we been saying that?" "Too long," he replied, handing her the envelope. "But this time, it's real. We're done, Emily appeared behind Dorothy. Frank, we saved you, Pie. I knew there was a reason I came tonight, he joked. They sat in the living room for a while after that. Coffee in mugs, pie on napkins, the world finally quiet. Not empty, just settled. Emily curled up in the armchair, phone in hand. Joan dozed lightly on the sofa. Frank scrolled through emails. Dorothy sat near the window, gazing at the clipping on the wall. You okay? Frank asked. Noticing her look, she nodded slowly. Peace is loud enough. He smiled. That it is. The room was dim now. Only the soft yellow light of the side lamp warming the walls. Emily had fallen asleep, half buried in a blanket. Joan murmured something incoherent in her sleep and rolled over. Frank stood to leave. Dorothy walked him to the door, envelope still in hand. Thank you, she said. He shook her hand, gently. You took your life back. That was all you? After he left, Dorothy turned off the porch light and stepped back into her home. Her home. The walls felt solid, the air clean, her body lighter. She paused by the framed article again and studied it in silence. Then she whispered, as if to herself, or maybe to all the women who'd been told to hush. My son said, "Don't make a scene after punching me." So I made a scene at the bank, and he lost everything. And she smiled, because some scenes are meant to be kept.